as possible, I thought we'd get moving. So Patrick, go ahead
I
and
will.
team, please.
Thank you. This is really a collaborative effort, from everyone on this page. I mean, the idea came up from Professor Naya in September of 2020, where he says, "Hey, what if we had an index?" So the team slowly came together in around April. So April of 2021. So on the left, well, I guess on my left, we have Ramos, who is currently who just joined the MFE program in September. But having said that, and in respect to the program, he's been working on this even when he was an undergraduate, looking to participate in our program since last year. Kieran is a second-year student. He's going to be graduating in May. And then we have Matthew, who is an IBE student. IB and something else. What you were telling me?
Computer engineering.
Computer engineering. And then Rebecca, who is in the College of Business, undergraduate. So guys.
Nice to meet you all.
Yep, I'll share my screen.
Take it away.
Perfect. Can you guys see everything okay?
Yep.
All right, Ramos, take it away.
No problem. So hi, everyone. So my name is Ramos. We've been studying, we started to do this project over summer of 2021. And my teammates, as mentioned before, Ramos, Matt Mahoney, Kieran Jang, and Rebecca Zemsky are all the teammates that has been involved in this. So just to talk about the efforts the team had. So the idea was generated by Professor Nandu Nair, and then we started this project over June 2021. We have messages across the team for over 600 times and with 40 meetings. And also at the summer 2021, we had the Summer Research Expo. And on the right is our poster that was presented at the mountaintop of Lehigh. So to give an overview for all the viewers and everyone here what an index is. So it's a method of tracking the performance of a group of assets in a standardized way. And typically, it measures the performance of a basket of security intended to replicate a certain area of the market. And just to give an example, a lot of indexes that has been heard, like the Standard & Poor's 500, Russell 1000, and also the Dow Jones Industrial Average.
So Ramos, before I continue, so are we allowed to ask questions in between, or do we wait till the end, or what would you like us to do?
Yes, you could ask any questions during the presentation.
Okay, so we can interrupt anytime. Okay, good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the big question is why we're creating the Pennsylvania index. So to create an index, we're basically, our target companies are all the Pennsylvania publicly traded companies. And the reason why we're doing this is to more or less showcase the economic trend using an interactive and also automated systems. And to have the index, we can provide more insights on trends of Pennsylvania economy that can help government officials or investors to better understand how Pennsylvania is doing comparing to the rest of the market.
And to be frank, Ramos, I mean, we should mention that we've looked and no one else has. I mean, the idea is to be able to have others reference this index. This is not just a project for us. This is for the university, literally. I mean, we'll happen to host it, but we would like it to be. This is where I guess Alex could provide us some insight on how it's done, but we'd like it to be the Schiller index of Yale, for example, that people start referring if they want to know what's going on in Pennsylvania, to come to us for it.
So our methods of creating an index, first of all, we use the total market capitalization. So it shows the dominance of the competitiveness in the stock market. And we basically weight our companies based on individual market cap per company. And as the company grows, their weight in the index will also grow. And then just like Professor Zoro mentioned, there's a lot of Ivy League schools trying to create their index. However, most of them are tabular data, not automated or updated. and they generally speaking, they do not have a very good visualization. So it's very difficult to actually get insights of how the companies is, how the state or the market is doing. So we aim to create our index to be automated, that decreases the upkeep and work and can basically provides information perpetually. And also we are using the daily and weekly updates to reduce the delay on data, and to make it also having a visualizations just a little bit more user-friendly, easier to digest and understand than having the typical tabular data.
Can I ask a couple of questions now about the index composition, or is that something you're going to get into more detail later, or is this time to do it?
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, so first of all, what was your starting universe that you used?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
What was the starting universe that you pulled the companies from?
We're basically at the beginning, we're trying to use Yahoo Finance and Y Finance, but later on we switch it to Bloomberg, which will be explained later on the slide. But we basically focus on everything that's in the S&P 500, and that is also by using Bloomberg filter. We basically filter out everything that is based in their headquarters that's based in Pennsylvania.
I just want to make it clear, it's not mutually, so it's all the companies that are publicly headquartered in Pennsylvania, and not just the ones that are headquartered in Pennsylvania and part of the S&P 500.
Okay, that's what I was getting at. So back to the question of, and again, this is a standard question when you design indices, kind of what your starting universe is. So it's not the S&P 500, it was something broader. And again, just from an automation standpoint, that's why I asked that. What did you base the list off of? Not the ones, the headquarters data, but just a broad universe that you started from.
Yeah, we'll definitely kind of explain the more automated and how we're pulling certain data and keeping track of which companies are still a part of the index and which are leaving the index a little bit later on.
Okay. The reason that's important is that for an index to be valuable, meaning not dollars and cents valuable, but usable, it always needs to be complete. And so when you start with like a known universe, and you kind of filter it from that, so whether it's the Russell 3000 or the Wilshire 5000, there's some broad universe that basically gives you your starting spot. That's where that was my point there. Something to so that it becomes very easy then from that to then filter against. Because otherwise you could have companies that if you don't use the right starting universe, may slip through the cracks, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
The other question, so you used total market capitalization. Is this adjusted for free float, or is it just total capitalization? How did you adjust for that, or didn't adjust for that?
I believe it's just total capitalization. I don't think we made any adjustments.
Okay. Again, not that it's right or wrong, but typically people look at what's called free float, which in the US is similar. But if you have some companies where you have big insider ownership where the shares are not available, standard practices is to exclude those shares from the calculation of the shares outstanding. So that's just standard practice. And the reason is that years ago, there was problems in certain markets when you use total capitalization. If all the shares aren't available, as the amount of assets index increases, you get a supply-demand imbalance. So the problem cropped up in Japan years ago when you have a lot of interlocking ownerships. So very few companies had a lot of shares that actually traded in the market. And so you might have something that has $50 billion market cap, but only 10 billion is actually available.
Okay.
So the standard practice is you use the 10 billion, and there's free float calculations are out there. If you start from a standard universe, they've already done that for you. So again, the Russell, any of the big index providers already have done that if that's your starting universe. That's why I was getting at kind of how you started it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes it easier.
Awesome.
But,
And
but,
so-
but I think that you guys, the project team used data from Bloomberg, right? Whatever was on Bloomberg, I think you pulled directly from there, correct?
Yeah, so we pulled our company list from Bloomberg, and then in terms of the stock data and shares outstanding, that's all pulled from a financial API.
From Bloomberg. So
No, it's the financial API that we used is Alpha Vantage.
so they're pulling it from someplace. So I think that something just to know, again, in depending on on what companies are here, it may or may not be an issue. Sometimes it is, and it supports an index when you're not using free float. So again, it's just standard practice. That's why I said that.
Awesome. And so pretty much what we did was once we kind of decided what our methods were to creating the index, we needed to figure out how are we going to build this application so that we can get it into the hands of the end users. So we pretty much wanted to build an application that is going to acquire financial data using financial APIs. And then we need to organize and store all of this historical data, calculate all the market caps, create our visualization, and then put all of these into an application framework, make sure that it's all automated so that we don't really have to touch it, and then push it into a production environment so that it's not just running locally on our machine, but that it is running on a server and that it can get into the hands of as many people. And so for our data source, what we did, so like we spoke about earlier, we narrowed down the companies from Bloomberg. And so we just kind of ran some filters on that. And then that's how we got our list of companies. And then for our stock and shares outstanding data, we are using Alpha Vantage, and we're using their daily adjusted close prices. And we're using their shares outstanding from their financial statements for the historical data. And then we can start using once we've kind of launched the index and loaded up all of the historical data, we can start using the live shares outstanding from the current day. And then we need to, once we kind of pull all of this information, we needed to organize it so that we knew kind of where it was and how to access it. So we created some data frames using the pandas library in Python, and we stored the data just as a backup, as kind of an element of persistence, into some CSV files so that we kind of always have the historical data. And these CSV files can be statically imported if needed.
Matt, just 1 second. I think we should point out that when you say Alpha Vantage, the reason why you're using this versus Bloomberg.
Yeah, so the reason we're using Alpha Vantage is that kind of once we put it up on the server, we're still able to access the Alpha Vantage API using our kind of API keys. Whereas for Bloomberg, we would kind of need to be seated at a Bloomberg terminal, and it's much more expensive to kind of connect everything there. And so this is a much cheaper option. We actually are using educational licenses, so we don't really have to pay anything to Alpha Vantage. Whereas if you were kind of doing this for your own personal gain, you have to pay for a premium license. And so this was kind of the cheapest option, and it got us all of the information we needed. And it's also powerful enough that the number of kind of API calls that we have per day is completely covered in the educational plan that we have.
I mean, this is a relationship that you build, but keep in mind that, I mean, how long are they going to keep it free?
Well, they'll keep it free as long as there's an active team here at Lehigh working on it. And then in terms of a bump up in cost, it's still only, I forget the exact amount, but it was maybe $5 a month or something like that. It still wasn't that expensive.
You know, and we can always probably go to them for, you know, advertising. I mean, they can put that, you know, this is powered by Alpha Advantage.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I have a question about how the data from this source compares to probably other well-accepted sources such as Bloomberg. I mean, so what's the delta, if you would, or what's the tracking error if you use this data source versus Bloomberg? If I took Bloomberg and then I compared the data from Bloomberg to the data that you get from this particular resource, is there a huge delta, or is it very minimal?
I think it's very minimal. I think the kind of delta that you could see is the historical shares outstanding. So in order to kind of get a lot of the historical data that you might get on a Bloomberg terminal, you can't really get the frequency of that in terms of historical on Alpha Vantage. So like I said, the kind of most up-to-date shares outstanding we can use is from their quarterly financial statements, as opposed to kind of looking at this specific date and time and then looking at, all right, what are the shares outstanding on this date and time? So what we're doing is we're kind of estimating their shares outstanding using these kind of quarterly amounts. So it's definitely not perfect from that perspective, but in terms of from the price point, this is kind of the most accurate we can get.
So a couple of points. For ease, and again, following kind of standard practice, changes to shares outstanding are usually done on a quarterly basis. No, you don't need to do it more often than that. There's exceptions. Every index provider will have exceptions if there's a big secondary offering or something like that, but I wouldn't worry about that. It just makes it easier because then it's just you download them once a quarter, you use them for the next quarter. Like I said, unless they're doing usually there's like a 5% rule. If the shares outstanding change 5% throughout the quarter, they may update it more frequently. Again, they're all a little bit different. For something like this, I wouldn't worry about it. If you just took it once a quarter, download it once, and then just keep it. Don't try to change it mid quarter.
Okay, yeah, that's what we're doing right now. So it's basically the most recent quarter is what the shares outstanding is going to be up until you hit that next quarterly financial statement.
And then the other
Alex, let me pipe in here. Those are the kind of insights that I believe your experience would really help the project team here. I mean, those insights are very valuable. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come here and do this with us.
This is kind of years of experience for index providers who kind of learned this stuff along the way. So the other thing, when you talk about the adjusted closing prices, you should know whether, and closing prices won't vary that much, I agree, whether it's a composite closing price or from the primary market. That is a distinction. The primary market is the standard practice. Again, you use whatever they have, that's fine, but just know what it is because somebody might ask that question.
Okay, yeah, we'll definitely take note of that.
And the difference, the reason that becomes important is the primary market is, in index terms, is the listing market. So trading takes place on multiple markets throughout the day. But the price that index providers use is the listing market price. So if a stock is listed on the New York, they use the New York close. The reason that's important, at least in terms of transparency, is that when people trade, when index funds trade, they need to get that price to minimize their tracking error. So if they know that the closing price is going to come from New York, that's where they route their orders to get to the New York close. It's really New York or NASDAQ in the US. So even though you can trade on all these other markets, all the trading at the close will take place in those two exchanges. And those are the prices at the index providers to minimize that tracking error that Nadu was mentioning. If you use the same price that the index providers use, that's what a product provider, somebody that was trading and running an index fund, that's the price they would trade at too. So again, just to bring it up to kind of, typical index standards.
Awesome. And so kind of how does our index get updated kind of once it's pushed and live? So what we created was we used a background scheduler library. So we're able to kind of run specific functions and tasks at our specified time intervals. So we update our data frames, CSV files, and the data visualization every 12 hours, just to make sure that, just because we're using the daily adjusted closing, you're not really going to see much change over a short period of time. So we kind of expanded that time just so we're not using as much kind of computing power. And then in terms of updating our company list. So like I said, we're pulling the company list from these Bloomberg terminals. And so the reason we're doing that is because we looked at a bunch of different ways on how to fully automate this process with data scraping on certain sites. And it's just, data scraping is so unreliable. If the site thinks that you're a bot, they can easily block your IP address and your whole site's going to come down and your data is going to kind of be all messed up. A bunch of errors are going to pop up. So what we decided to do was kind of keep it a little bit simpler, and we're going to be pulling the list from the Bloomberg terminals manually. And the reason we decided that this would be okay not to automate is just because the list isn't going to be changing on such a high frequency that we need to automate the process. So if we go in and we update the list once a week, we kind of go in on a Friday and adjust the new list of which companies we're looking at over the weekend for that Monday opening, then we are going to be totally okay.
Again, my suggestion is you do that once a quarter.
Once a quarter? Okay.
You're doing it weekly. As I said, indices will have rules on when a stock will get added to an index. But typically, once a quarter should be fine for something like this. If there's IPOs, you could add it. You could have a rule that adds it more frequently. But again, in terms of making it easy and pretty standard, just do it once a quarter. It saves you, especially if you've got a manual process where you have to download it and check things. No reason to do it more frequently than that. Like you said, the number of new companies that'll be coming public, during a quarter, probably aren't a lot anyhow.
Yeah.
So the other thing that I was wondering, Alex, maybe you can shed some light on this, is if there's a bankruptcy or if there's a delisting or if there's an acquisition and the company goes out of business, what happens then?
So this is where why indices aren't totally automated.
Yes, we try to. The team really tried to automate everything. I could see that, but
and this is the problem, you can't, right? And so at the end of the day, there's this what index providers call corporate actions, right? And so corporate actions there's a bunch of things that could happen to companies in an index. One is just that, bankruptcy situations, the delist, they decide to move, you saw today, company's going to delist from New York, move to Hong Kong, right? Yeah. I mean, that sort of stuff happens all the time. That's why they always have like some sort of governance structure or committee or people that actually, you have to look at this stuff. And so there's tools that allow you with the index providers, because they're running, hundreds of thousands of these indices all at once. So they have tools that look for that and produce these sort of like kind of corporate actions. But at the end of the day, oftentimes somebody has to make a decision, because when you take a company out because of bankruptcy, those are going to be less frequent. They could happen, they'll be less frequent. And typically bankruptcies are less of a problem because by the time a company's gone bankrupt, its weight in the index by definition is going to be very small. Yeah. So it's not going to throw off your index too much, right? Even if you're carrying it, because by the time it goes bankrupt, it's down below $1 a share or something, unless it happens quickly, which has happened. Again, normally you would have a rule book that would say you're kind of monitoring for these sort of things, but that's not really practical in some cases like this. The bigger issue is going to be things like stock splits and kind of share changes. Which is why you need that. That's something where, and how that, I'll ask when we get to it, but how that impacts your calculation, because it does change the index. And so I don't know if you factored in an index divisor into your calculation. I could explain why that's important in a second.
Well, I can definitely see how a stock split would throw off our index, especially because we're only updating our shares outstanding once a quarter. So if there's a mid-quarter stock split, that price is going to half, but we're still going to keep that same. So it's basically going to cut their market cap in half. Yeah. So I think we're definitely going to have to go through and figure out.
Yeah. So usually what people do with index divisors was a concept developed years ago to keep the continuous history of an index when you have these sort of changes. So as a new company comes in or out, and so what the index divider does is it's a way of linking day-to-day indices, so you don't get a jump from something that isn't because the value of the company went up or down. That's the basic concept of an index divisor. So like a stock split is less problematic because the shares double and the price goes down in half. So the market value, when you're doing it in capitalization terms, that doesn't change too much. Mm-hmm. won't change at all, right? So you'll be okay there.
But that's only if they update the number of shares outstanding.
Yes,
Correct?
yes.
That is the problem.
Corporate actions, you have to know when these splits happen. Yes.
Yep.
So again, normally you would have automated checks that will see the shares outstanding changed. Right. Bloomberg will play things like that will pick up that change. Ideally, you would know it's about to happen because these sort of corporate actions are known ahead of time. In your case, you probably might be a day delayed. So again, shouldn't be a big issue if it's a little bit off. But in the real world, all these corporate actions are about to happen and you factor that in and you plan ahead. The bigger issue is things like mergers. Two companies merge. So the capitalization now has gone up because you're combining the asset value. That will distort your index if you don't have a divisor. Because if you take two companies, one from outside of Pennsylvania and one company inside of Pennsylvania, it's worth $10 billion today. It merges with another company. Headquarters is still Pennsylvania. Now its market cap is $15 billion. So your index is going to jump by 5 billion. But it's not really increase in value. It's because, again, it's the merger. So an index divider would adjust for that to keep it continuous. Again, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, for your purposes, I think, these are issues that have come up. These things come up all the time. You're never going to have a perfect index for that reason, because you're not going to have analysts that can monitor this on a real time to look out for these sort of things. So, but that's just kind of the way it's done in the real world.
So Alex, are you suggesting then that we should have an index team that sort of monitors actions on this portfolio of names that we have, correct?
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work, but
right, this is why index providers have these scale businesses, right? Because that's exactly what they do. So one way to do it maybe is if you increase the frequency of your rebalance to say monthly, the likelihood of it being off is less, right? So if you do it quarterly, you run the risk that something happens right after quarter end and you're carrying kind of bad data for till the next quarter end. Doing it monthly, doing it weekly is a lot of work. Doing it quarterly might require some sort of monitoring during the quarter. If you do it monthly, you're kind of meeting it halfway, And so if you run your process once a month, maybe that'll minimize these sort of problems without having to have somebody monitoring these things all the time. Because that's, as I said, for one index, that's a lot of work that somebody's got to go in, check all this stuff. Even if you automate it, it's still a lot of downloading and checking.
Yeah.
I actually have an idea. I want to run it through you, Alex. So is it possible that we monitor certain news feed? We monitor keywords like merger, and we also records the name of the company and kind of backfeed into us our data pipeline, and we can block certain companies from appearing on a different, like a separate fixed index.
That may be, you were talking about 30, 40 companies. So monitoring the companies in the index might not be that hard. There are people monitor corporate actions. I mean, there's services that do that. Index providers do it. You buy, again, you're not going to go out and buy it. Bloomberg has it built into their system. But again, I don't know how Bloomberg works with academics, institutions. They're very strict for businesses using their corporate action data. They're very restrictive. For an academic institution, they may be okay, in which case all the data will be in a Bloomberg terminal, and their corporate action data is actually quite good. So they're doing that monitoring for you. But I don't know, I don't know how they operate with schools.
We have a database called from Refinitiv. And what you can do there is you can create a watch list of the equities there. And then what you can do is within that watch list, you can track if you can flag anytime a split or an acquisition occurs, it'll flag it and send you an alert. So we can do that.
Do they have a corporate action flag?
Yes,
Refinitiv is much easier to work with, by the way. Than
yeah,
Bloomberg.
yeah, we have that. We have that, and once you create the watch list of names there, anytime there's an action affecting it, you can flag it and it'll alert you. So
So one question is if they would notify you also of share offerings also.
yes, we can do that as well. You can flag
Yes.
those as well. Yeah.
So if you can flag all that, then basically, yeah, that's the way you do it, at least for the companies in the index.
Yes,
That will help you with new companies coming in, but that you can do that once a quarter. then.
correct.
So that could run, basically, that runs every day, basically.
Correct.
Okay, so theoretically, we can kind of automate the process if we just block the whatever gets flagged.
Yeah,
Correct.
so at least you'll know about it, right? And then the question is, how do you put that into place?
Yeah,
Again,
I think we have to do that manually per
Yes.
case.
and that's okay. It's actually better. If you try to automate everything, you're never going to automate it because there's always going to be some edge case that comes up that you hadn't thought about. And so if you can flag it and have call it an index committee that looks at it and makes a decision, that's fine. That's kind of the way it's really done. If you have a list of what Refinitiv allows you to flag, I could take a look at it and see what types of data fields would be useful to capture.
Yeah.
Certainly share changes over, because they may have share changes over a certain percentage or just maybe share changes.
We have very good connections with Refinitiv. In fact, we conduct a Refinitiv icon certification in the financial services lab. So
They're much better as an organization to deal with than Bloomberg. Bloomberg's got better quality data.
yes,
We used a lot of Refinitiv data. It's the old Thomson Reuters data, yeah.
Yeah.
And chances are your prices that you get from Alpha, whatever that organization,
yeah,
chances are they're probably coming from Refinitiv. They're probably picking it up from them because they're probably one of the biggest redistributors of exchange data. So they pull it from the exchanges and then they distribute it to everybody else.
right.
It's probably the same source. You can find out what they use. But if you have that, I'd be happy to help you go through that and kind of help figure out what fields you'd want to look for and how you would implement changes based on that. Because if you can run that, because that would be an automated run basically. You'd have a list of tickers for QSIPs. And then that would check and then flag it. And then, basically, ideally, I imagine it could either send you an email or somehow notify you.
Yeah, Refinitiv sends an email.
Yeah.
On
And
any
then you just sit down and figure out how to treat it, how to treat that corporate action. That's exactly how corporate actions are dealt with. Some of them, in real world, you would have a rule book that would say, if this happens, this is how we treat it. So everybody knows. In this case, I think you kind of figure it out as you go and just keep track of it so that you build your rule book that way. It's from experience.
So Alex, would you be able to get us a version of a rule book to look at so that we get some idea of how it's done?
Yeah, they're all available. Yeah, I can get you the one. All the index providers publish them.
Oh, yeah.
And
Okay.
I can get you a couple. And what they'll do is they'll have, typically there's an overarching one that talks about how they treat what happens if a market closes, how they handle splits, how they handle share counts, all that. And then they'll have a specific methodology for a specific index. So they go hand in hand. So one is kind of more general and one is more specific. But I can pull a few down for you.
Great. Thank you. That would be very useful.
And you'll see how they, and again, there's no right or wrong, right? Everybody does it a little bit different. I mean, there's a lot of common practice, but, for example, share counts, some people will do it when there's more than a 5% change. Some might do it at a 10% change. There's nobody sits there and says one is right or wrong. It's just kind of what standard practice has developed over the years.
So we'll put all of those things into play in version 2 or maybe version 3. But let's continue with the presentation. Yeah.
Sure. So after finishing up our data pipeline, we were looking into how to bring the website live. So for the HTML element, our core our core priority was getting the visualization up, and we use Matplot library. This is a Python library that basically takes the data from our pipeline and automatically embed it in our HTML website. Secondly, we have a list of companies on the left, just to give an idea and just helpful information. And we also include other core elements, like title, text boxes, and tables. The second part is CSS style sheets, which help us with the formatting, things like font, color, and they're also like following a university guideline. The UI design is a work in progress because our priority at this time is to push the working environment first. We want to make sure our data pipeline work in a virtual environment. We just want to make sure it works before we make it look good, basically.
Okay, so you're going to add all the bells and whistles and sexy stuff later on. Is that what you're that's what you're saying?
Yeah, they will be coming.
All right. Okay. Maybe those are the things that Alex can advise us on as well. So
stylistic one, but but I did take a look at it and it didn't look that. Typically people might have being able to run the index from this date to that day, things like that, flexibility. I would suggest take a look at some of the, and I'll send you links to some of the big index providers' websites, and you just see how they portray their indices and how they allow you to do graphing and things like that, just so you can see.
Sure.
So our goal this semester was to host the index. And in order to do that, we needed to create a virtual environment for the Lehigh Python server. And we were in contact with LTS, and they gave us a file with requirements to create this virtual environment. So in order to, and then we had to build a Flask application framework in the development environment, and then we prepared the Flask app for production using a WSGI application and using the JIT version control to maintain functionality as the application was updated.
And so I'll just kind of go through. Can you guys still see my screen, or is it just the slideshow?
Can see the live version.
You can see the live version right now?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. So pretty much, yeah. So if you haven't seen the index already, we have kind of the monthly, weekly, and daily performance indicators, just using a little bit of conditional formatting, green if it's positive, red if it's negative. And then in terms of our kind of visualization, you actually can look at specific periods. So if you kind of use these controls down here, you can zoom in kind of if you want the date of this drop, you can zoom in on it and it'll readjust kind of the margins here. So clearly this was during, I'm guessing, I don't have the year, but I'm guessing this is
March.
Yeah,
It's
March
2020.
Yeah, that's definitely when COVID kind of came into play. And then you can kind of reset it, look at different periods. Just have to move kind of the tiles of everyone's video so I can access the corner. And then you can zoom in, say if I want to just kind of look at, one second here, kind of the most recent data. I can kind of look here and see how are the market caps kind of in this most recent week. I think in the future, we'll definitely want to kind of add more onto our x-axis here, just so you get more information and possibly have a light grid on the background so you can estimate a little bit better. But that's kind of all going to be pushed into version 2, which I'll get into in a little bit. Also, we have just kind of a list of all the company tickers, and I'll say this now, when we push to version 2, what I want to kind of be able to happen is that if you click on a ticker, you can get information on that specific company and see kind of how they're weighted. I'd also like to kind of reorganize this list based off of their market cap. So you kind of have the heavy hitters up front, and then as you scroll down, you kind of get the smaller companies. That's also something I want to implement. And so with that, I will kind of get back into the presentation just to talk about version 2. I might just have to stop the share real quick just to get back.
One suggestion also, so you're plotting the total market capitalization. I would index that to pick a starting level, but usually like at 100 at some date.
Okay.
That's practice. When you show the companies, I agree, showing their weighting in the index is useful data. So you know, you've got whatever it is, 40 companies. Top weighting will be 4 or 5%, whatever, you know, take it out to 2 decimal places. So it sums up percent. People see that. That's useful information because that gives you the relative size of that company to everybody else. And you could have it in terms of its, you can also show their market capitalization too, which is the same thing as weighting.
Yeah, awesome. And so kind of bringing us into what's kind of the further direction for everything. So what I want to kind of bring to this index is I want to adopt more of a full stack framework. So right now we're just kind of keeping everything in our Python file and using these CSVs. And what I want to do is first adopt a database structure so that we're really kind of keeping track of everything. And then also using kind of these other kind of frameworks, be able to build out these visualizations and make everything much nicer. So right now we're kind of running just the basic HTML, CSS, which gets the information out there, but it's not necessarily the best thing to look at. And it's not as interactive and you can't have as many bells and whistles as what you would do if you kind of did everything using kind of Node or something like that. And so what I kind of want to bring to the future is take what we have written and what's working, and then break it up into this kind of full stack framework, which will make kind of expanding much easier. And so we want to add additional functionality like kind of the maintaining the index and implementing those changes on monitoring everything that we spoke about earlier, looking into monetizing the index. And we also want to improve the look and add new features like what I talked about.
Good. Couple of other suggestions, and I'll get you a copy of something like a fact sheet. You'll want a fact sheet because part of so kind of the natural place to start once you put a we'll call it tweaking is like there's going to be in Harrisburg some commerce department, right? They would love something like this, I would imagine. You know, the state government will have an office someplace that's job it is to spur investment into Pennsylvania, and having something like this is useful. But you'll need to have some additional information available for them that'll be useful that they can give out. You know, a fact sheet is just and the fact sheets can be automated. So the fact sheet would have, you know, companies in it, kind of methodology, some general rules around how it's maintained. It's basically, you know, PDF that could be printed so they could send it to people. But again, somebody could sit there and say, okay, what are these companies? You have the tickers, but not everybody understands the tickers. And so, you know, they would have the tickers and names, or the names are probably more important. In your graphic on that page, to the extent that you have tickers, again, I would have either, and you could do it, you know, you might be able to do it through a highlight, like if the cursor goes over the ticker, you see what the name is, for example.
Yeah.
Or maybe even if you have a link to their website, to the corporate website, that would be useful. So if you go over ABC, you know, pops a little box, tells you what ABC is, maybe what it's, you know, some quick facts about it, and maybe has a link to their website. So again, if you're using this to kind of promote the economy, you're promoting these companies, right? These are the companies there. And so then all of these companies like it. One idea that we used this in some offices actually was instead of just using the tickers, you actually have the companies allow you. You have a scrolling ticker of the company's logos, which is really cool.
Okay.
A lot. Yeah, you have to get their permission and all that. We used to do that in some of our offices, right, where we'd have the companies in a particular index scrolling with the company logos. And that's, again, from a promotional standpoint, that goes a long way, right? But that's a lot of, that's a big, that's called step 4 or 5.
Yeah.
So I have a question for Alex. So when we're constructing this index over the summer, we're talking about grouping these companies based on sectors and industry. I just want to know, for someone who's using an index, how much does that mean to them? And do you think that is something necessary or essential for us to do?
I think it's useful, right? Especially if you're using this as a promotion for the state. You know, knowing what, so taking these companies and breaking them down by, and there's certain standard classification systems. The most common used is GICS. And all these companies all fit into a standardized classification system. You don't know, GICS is something that is, you have to license it. I don't know how they would, if they would let you use it, if you can pull it from Refinitiv. Refinitiv might have some sort of classification system. It may or may not be GICS, but even if it isn't, you want some standard definition so that if somebody looks at these companies, you can then sum the weight and find out, well, guess what? You know, we're 30% in industrials, you know, 20% in information technology. You know, now that's starting to tell a story about Pennsylvania. Right. And so having that information, not necessarily having it on this page here, although you could, but that tells you now what this index and what the state is about. Right. Is it a high tech state? You know, I mean, there's a lot, I've always read about a lot of high tech companies going in the Allentown area. You know, if you start looking at this, or is it, you know, dominated by, you know, US Steel and a bunch of the old industrial companies? That's where sector information becomes useful. So the way sector classifications work, they start at the sector level. Depending on the classification system, there's usually about 10 sectors, economic sectors. Then they get into industries and sub-industries. You don't need to go too far deep, even at the sector level. It's useful. And again, you can check and see what Refinitiv has, because you can map it basically to the ticker then. They'll have something, they'll have some sort of sector classification system. It may not be the one everybody uses, but it'd be good enough. And I said, that starts painting a story now of what this index is, right? And then it starts explaining performance also, right? Because if it's heavily skewed to healthcare, and you know, other segments of the market are doing well, this index is going to underperform the market as a whole. Well, there's a reason for it. Right, and that's where the sector information starts giving you that information. The other suggestion I would have is you have the index chart, which looks great. I would have some other index to compare it against. You know, that's probably relevant, maybe broad-based. Again, it's not going to follow it because this is a subset. Whether it's the S&P 500 or the Russell 3000, something that's broad-based, acceptable. Because now you start to see, again, telling the story, are these Pennsylvania companies doing better or worse in the market as a whole?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Right. That's how indices get used, right? And it tells a story. And so this is telling an absolute story of just these companies. Now you really want to know, how are they doing relative to the rest of the market? You know, the perfect situation for the state is if these companies do better than the market as a whole. That tells a positive story about Pennsylvania. You know, trust me, the Economic Bureau in Harrisburg would love to be able to tell a story like that.
Yeah, so that's where I think, Alex, your point about creating a relative index, or indexing it at 100 on January the 1st, 2017 or something.
Yeah, you started at 100, and then you can, and then use the same scaling for whatever index that you compare it against.
Right.
You know, so again, you can use the S&P 500, you could use the Russell 3000, anything that's a broad U.S. equity-based index. I wouldn't use the Dow; that's too narrow.
Mm.
But either the 500 is roughly 60% of the U.S. market cap, and the Russell 3 is about 90 some odd, 95%. There's others. You can just see what you can get from Refinitiv.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, you know, or again, you know, in a call it down the road version, you give people a choice of comparing it against other indices or sectors or things like that. I mean, that's, again, how people start using this information to make it valuable to them.
Great.
So
So,
it's a good, no, it's really, it is a nice project.
so going forward, I think we will need to involve Alex a lot more. And I don't know how much time you have, Alex, to devote to this.
I'm fine. I have plenty of time nowadays, so.
All right. Okay. So you may regret saying that, Alex, because we are going to sort of cannibalize some of your time here. All right. So.
Fine. And I'm not that far away not to make a trip either.
All right. Fantastic. Yeah, I can maybe buy you a couple of cocktails or something, but that's about the only comp we can give you.
That's all I need. This is fun. And no, I think you're onto something. I mean, there is, so we had at S&P, we actually had a team that does what we call custom indices, which is something like this, right? That are built for specific purposes.
Mm-hmm.
We actually did a similar index for University of Miami.
Okay.
And it was done to promote, forget if it was Florida or the kind of greater Miami area companies. They actually paid S&P to calculate it for them. You don't need to do that. You know, you got nice, you're most of the way there already. But the idea of these sort of, indexes like this that represent a particular state become of interest, because it tells a story about the state. And I think finding the right organization to help sponsor it in Harrisburg to really use it, that'll be an interesting project.
Okay.
I think they would love some.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, what you brought up is an interesting point. I mean, and succession. And I think keep in mind that the students that you're speaking with, and so basically what you're telling us, someone paid you to do what we did here for a different state. And unfortunately, the students are not being paid to do that. They pay for I guess they're being rewarded. I guess in the case of Ramus and Kieran through the Capstone project, Rebecca and Matt not. Although Matt is going to be involved in one of our other projects on natural language processing, so that's good for him. But so the issue that we're going to have now is obviously we want to keep it going, and they're not employees technically. So we're going to need to find new students. So hopefully we have a transition period with the new students coming in, but we may not always find the right student for it. So we need to think about succession, and funding will certainly help. And so then the other aspect, and this is what we're going to do a lot, Alex, is the marketing, right? Who's going to, and how do we get paid, or at least how do we go? We could find students certainly that could go out and start looking for these things.
So, like I said, I think kind of economic bureaus are the type that would like something like this and help sponsor that. There's got to be somebody in Harrisburg that does this sort of stuff that promotes the state from an economic standpoint.
And Lehigh University has a person in charge of government relationships, so we can normally find out who that is and liaise with that person. So
yeah, you've done most of the work already, right? I think, like you said, maybe this is a project that continues year to year, and you could, there's a lot you could do with this. Now, people do create, I'm trying to think if there's any, look, there's a big market nowadays for indices. There's a big market in index-based products. I'm trying to think if I've seen a state-specific index-based product. I've seen pretty much everything else that are ETFs nowadays. Thematics and ideas. Yeah, I'm not saying that somebody would buy and to get into that, there's a lot more that needs to be done in terms of regulatory and stuff like that. But people do use indices for a lot. I think, to be honest, finding an angle with the state to sponsor this is a great way to go, because maybe it's $10,000 a year or $5,000. The state, I'm sure, could afford whatever it takes to maintain this. And then you can have some students that get practical experience, because I could see this being something that keeps going on, right? I mean, you've done a lot of the heavy lifting already. That, you know, I can't help you with the kind of the technology aspects of it. I can help you with calculation of the index, kind of the rules around that methodology, how to bring it up to kind of standard that a real index provider would use, and help you how to position it for marketing purposes. That's not too hard. That's not going to take a lot of time or effort. And like I said, you've done a lot of the heavy lifting already. You know, the technology behind this. So, you know, you could break this down eventually to counties, right? I mean, you could, you know, there's a lot of, this is how, you know, the world started with the Dow Transportation Average as a single index that was out there. And now there's, you know, I forget what the last count is. There's something like 6 or 7 million indices out there.
Oh my God.
So now, if currency versions, sector versions, but, you know, it's because once you build something like this, to slice and dice it, right, and take these companies now and say, okay, this is an all cap index. And you want to understand the way the real world works? Well, which of these are small cap companies and which are large cap companies or mid cap? You divide them based on capitalization. You can follow standard practice, or you can say, you know what, top 60% is large cap or whatever. Again, it tells a different story when you start doing it that way. And so there's a good learning experience. I know someone at Rutgers that actually teaches a class on the indexing world. And their final project is designing indices. Now they get into not just index design, but, you know, ETFs and index funds and the whole thing. But she's somebody that used to be she used to work at one of the index providers and is now become like an adjunct professor and teaches a class every, I think twice a year they teach it. And their final project for the teams, and she gets a lot of people that sign up for a class. The final project for the teams is they build an index, not something like this, but something thematic just to get hands-on. And a lot of them want to get a job on Wall Street. And so it's useful experience.
Hey, Matt, is this live on the Lehigh web? I know we're waiting for your approval. Okay. Professor and I were waiting for, this is not live yet, technically, although we could make it. But Matt, how is that working?
Yeah, so right now, so the link is live, so you can, if you have the link, you can access it, but it is not on any Lehigh branded web page. So pretty much if you know the link, you can see it, but if you don't, then you're not going to see it.
Yeah,
So who has editing control on this website?
I do, I believe Ramos does, and I believe Kieran does, and then Keith from LTS.
All right. Just let's keep it not live yet. We will go live once I need to talk to the dean a little bit more about this before we
Okay, I can also go into the code and just kind of put in a stop so that it also takes this link down.
No, don't do anything with it right now.
Okay, all right.
Because if I wanted to talk to the dean about this, I want to sort of get her input on what is appropriate and so on before we do anything else with this. Right.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so Professor Nair and Professor Zorro, if everything is approved and you guys wanted to kind of market it on the MFE website, I can just talk to the LTS team and they can put in an appropriate place. So
yeah, but this is what yeah, but we have to wait until we get the deans, right? Because I mean, right now it's live, right? But if tomorrow you guys get jobs, you know, on Wall Street, the link is going to be valid for a certain while, but then somebody needs to take care of this.
Yeah, so those are important issues. The
Yes.
continuity issue is huge, and we need to make sure that is there before we go live with this, right? So we can't just introduce it and say, oh, next day it's disappeared. You know, where is it?
Especially if we go and market it as Lehigh Index.
Yeah.
What happened to it? And right now, yeah, I mean, I could get students interested in the project every year, but you know, it needs a stronger base somehow. LTS may need to take it over, or maybe not take it over, but
LTS will not take it over. It'll
No,
have
but we
to be
need,
a
we
part of
need,
the business. Yeah, yeah.
need the succession plan, really. That's what we.
Probably.
You have is there a class that this ties into?
Yes, I mean, it's not a class, it's a program. I mean, all of our program, as you can see, have in Master in Financial Engineering, we have 15 projects, right? So this is one of them.
Hey, this really, I mean, index design is really part of like an investment, it could be part of an investment class too, to draw people, again, aside from the technical aspects of it. But the idea of the use of the index, what it means, that's kind of pretty traditional, investment management. That's
Yes.
Yeah, I will get our investments faculty, the people who teach investments, to volunteer a team every year and give them extra credit or something. So we'll find a way of
I'm
Yeah.
happy to help kind of speak to them about indexing in general. Like I said, I've got time on my hands nowadays. So
Okay, wonderful.
let me go back. I owe you methodology